Welcome. This interview is part of the Historical Society of the New York Court's recording of the bar's response to the pandemic project, which creates a platform for New York State attorneys to share their experiences on practicing during the COVID-19 pandemic while recording history as it happens. My name is Randall, and I am of counsel to the firm of Meyer, Suozzi, English, and Klein. Prior to that, I was the presiding justice of the Appellate Division, Second Department. The firm that I am associated with now is a medium-sized law firm on Long Island, with offices in Garden City and in Manhattan. We are a full-service law firm, and we have practice groups which include the areas of corporate, trust and estates, bankruptcy, litigation, personal injury, as well as tax, certiorari, and real estate and labor. I'm joined today by my colleague, Matt Marcucci, an associate in our litigation department. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, Matt.
It's my pleasure, Judge. Nice to see you, albeit remotely.
All right, thank you very much. All right, I'm going to be asking some questions which will focus on your experience during the COVID-19 outbreak. And we will be discussing your interactions with the local and the appellate courts and your use of technology in advancing the business of the firm. But first of all, what has been your personal experience at this time? How have you, your staff, and family been impacted by COVID-19?
Well, thanks, Judge. It's certainly been an unusual time, to say the least. I live in Jackson Heights, which is a neighborhood in Queens, in New York City, with my wife and with our 6-month-old daughter. As you mentioned, I'm an associate at Meyer Suozzi. I'm a commercial litigator. I primarily advise and represent companies and occasionally individuals in business-related disputes, contract-related disputes, business torts, occasionally employment-related matters. And COVID has certainly affected me in my practice, as I'm sure it has affected all lawyers practicing statewide and nationwide. But in terms of my family, we've been exceptionally fortunate. No one in my family has contracted the virus, at least as far as we know. And as I mentioned, my wife gave birth to our daughter, our first child, on January 14th. So just before this was really, an issue in this country. And I remember during our hospital stay, during my wife's delivery, there were not any confirmed cases yet in New York. And there may not have been any confirmed cases in the United States. I do recall that initial outbreak in Washington State. I believe that was sometime in late January. But as far as we were concerned, in the hospital for a couple of nights in mid-January, it was as though COVID didn't exist. So obviously that's a completely different world from now, even though that was just a few months ago. And we lived our lives normally, as I'm sure most people did, really through the end of February until the first case of the virus was confirmed in New York City. I guess that was on or around March 1st. We loved to dine out. We had family members come to travel to stay with us from Florida, from Pennsylvania, from Maine, and we went out together. It was just normal life as the virus was brewing. So it's really strange to look back on that period now and think, that we were just doing things that today we would never even consider doing without putting on a mask or more. I was continuing to go into the office through, I remember my last day, it was Friday the 13th of March. And at that point, as I'm sure you remember, the office expected to close for a couple of weeks, I think it was. At that point, I had already been basically, not quite quarantining, but we weren't going out to restaurants anymore. We were staying at home. We really weren't going into public unless it was absolutely necessary or to get a little fresh air. But the firm really only expected to close for a couple of weeks. And then things obviously began to change very dramatically and very rapidly. We can see Elmhurst Hospital from our apartment, which is obviously a hospital in the Elmhurst section of Queens. And sometime in mid to late March, that really became like the epicenter of the virus in the United States. So that was, that was scary. But as I said, we've been very lucky.
What adjustments did you have to make? You indicated that you live in Jackson Heights, Queens, near Elmhurst Hospital. What adjustments did you have to make in your personal life in light of your proximity to the epicenter?
Well, as I said, life changed dramatically. And within a couple of days, we had, I don't want to say barricaded ourselves in our apartment, but that's essentially what we did. My wife was feeling a little sick, I actually just remember. Fortunately, it was not COVID. But it was just as COVID was really starting to become a problem in New York City. And I remember I went to the local pharmacy, and this must have been in early March or maybe even mid-March. And there were a lot of people lined up at the prescription counter, most of whom did not have any masks on, because at the time, I think the authorities, the powers that be, may have been recommending not to wear masks. So it sort of sends a bit of a shiver down my spine to look back on that. When I was in this pharmacy where the virus was obviously spreading, just to pick up a relatively routine prescription. So my point in saying that is we stopped going out. Everything that we could have delivered to our apartment, we had delivered. We're fortunate enough to have a little garden area in the back of the apartment. And so that basically became, our great outdoors, so to speak. We would walk around the garden to get a little bit of fresh air. But all groceries we had delivered, everything else we had delivered, and we rarely left our apartment, for any purpose, really. So it was quite a dramatic change. Now, I will say this, Judge, the silver lining in all of this is that I've been able to spend an incredible amount of time with my little daughter, which would not have happened in normal circumstances. I'm typically commuting or in the office for 12 hours a day. I mean, by the time I get in my car to drive out there and come home, it's, 7 p.m. on a good day.
I know what you mean. I have my 2 young adult daughters at home with us now, and it's been many years since we have been all together.
I'm sure that was something no one expected.
All right, let me ask you this, Matt. Before coming to Meyer Suozzi, just tell us a little bit about your professional background.
Sure. Yeah, happy to. I went to Fordham Law School. I graduated in 2014. So I've been practicing for about 5.5, 6 years. I initially practiced with a firm in Manhattan, general practice, a small general practice firm, where I was a litigator. I've been a commercial litigator my entire legal career. I knew that that's what I wanted to do, really, even before I went to law school. So that's what I focused on. And then I moved to a different firm in Manhattan for a couple of years before coming to Meyer Suozzi. And that firm was an interesting experience for me. They did a lot of art-related litigation. So something that I found to be very interesting, but perhaps didn't want to focus exclusively on. And so here I am at Meyer Suozzi, and it's been great. I've been at the firm for a little over a year at this point. I joined in May of 2019.
Now, you've been working closely with the chair of our litigation department, and of course, litigation has been affected tremendously by COVID. Now, regarding such matters as adjournments, extensions of deadlines, the ability to file new cases, how has COVID affected your ability to accomplish these goals?
It's affected it in a number of ways, some of which have been unexpected and perhaps a little surprising. And, I'll get to that. But first things first, it's slowed things down,
Mhm.
obviously, litigations. Trials have, of course, come to a complete halt, trials in civil matters. And in terms of slowing things down more generally, a submission that might have been due originally in March or April, maybe we just finally got around to filing it as a result of COVID-related logistical problems or delays or court extensions and the like. And then I can think of other matters where, civil litigations that were in their sort of nascent stages. Maybe a pleading had been filed, but a judge had not yet been assigned to the matter. And those types of cases kind of lingered in like a legal purgatory for several weeks or a couple of months. But that, I think, now is really started to change because, we've done a good job in New York State of managing this crisis, I think. And so the courts are finally starting to reopen.
Speaking as a practitioner, have the courts kept us informed regarding changes in procedures, changes in practice? Has that information been readily available, and has it been reliable for you?
Okay, I think at the outset of all of this, things were a little frenzied, not just in the court system, but everywhere. But pretty quickly, things started to become more ordered, more streamlined. And I think Judge DiFiore has really done an exceptional job of providing us with frequent updates, comprehensive updates of, changes by the day to the court system statewide. And her video updates and the transcripts of those updates and the consolidation of all the various administrative orders in one place on the coronavirus webpage, on the New York State Courts webpage, has been a very useful resource.
Can you share with us some real-life experiences that you may have had during this crisis regarding your day-to-day role as an attorney, particularly in light of social distancing and the closure of courthouses for a protracted period of time? What are some examples of what you had to live with?
Yeah, so I had mentioned that there were some surprising aspects of all of this. And in speaking about Judge Fiore's various initiatives, she's really emphasized that judges should use this sort of downtime, as it were, as an opportunity to clear their dockets. And I think a lot of judges, perhaps not all, but I think a lot of judges have really heeded her advice. So I'm thinking about one matter of mine in particular, where there was a pretty substantial submission, really cross motions from both parties for summary judgment. And I think as a consequence of Judge DiFiore's directives, we got a decision on these cross motions much, much sooner than we had anticipated. I'm not sure that would have been the case had things been operating normally and the judge presiding over this case, had been hearing all sorts of various matters day in and day out with the busy calendar. So that I guess is another sort of silver lining in all of this. Now, in terms of, I guess, my day-to-day practice, I have had a number of virtual appearances over the past few months, which has definitely been a new and interesting experience.
Yes, tell us how they went.
So the advantages of a virtual oral argument are, I guess, readily apparent. From the comfort of your own home office or your dining room table or whatever it may be, you can dial into court and deliver your argument. It was a little unnerving, actually, at first. And certainly this saves the time and expense of having to commute to, let's say, a particular courthouse. I've been actively litigating this one matter in Suffolk County Supreme Court out in Riverhead, and the courthouse is at least an hour and 10 minutes with no traffic from our office in Garden City, and it's even farther than that from my residence in Queens. So certainly being able to dial in for the 2 or 3 virtual arguments that I've had in this matter saved me and my client a lot of time and money, just which would have otherwise been devoted to commuting or on a busy motion day waiting around for 1, 2, maybe even 3 hours for our case finally to get called in the courthouse itself. So that's been a positive aspect of all of this, the added convenience. I do, however, think that there's no real substitute for a face-to-face, in-person interaction, particularly in the context of court appearance. You know, there are certain types of motions and applications in litigation that probably would be well served through virtual appearances. If it's a specific request for some sort of emergency relief or a temporary restraining order where time truly is of the essence, then yes, perhaps a virtual oral argument is the way to go to prevent you know, any party's rights from being prejudiced. However, if a real substantive motion, like a summary judgment motion, for example, is to be argued, or of course, in the case of trials, I don't think that there's a substitute for appearing in person in a courtroom before a judge. There's just a certain gravitas and a serious of purpose, I think, that being physically present inside of a courtroom engenders. And so it's something I've really come to appreciate, you know, dialing into court.
Now, in the virtual appearances you've made in Suffolk County, was it a video or was it audio only? What was the format?
It was audio only. It was audio only. So it was basically a conference call format. But it was a full oral argument with, you know, 3 or 4 different attorneys representing various interests. And logistically, I will say that there were a couple of instances where it wasn't clear to the court reporter what was being said, and people were talking over each other, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Now, what technique, if any, did the judge utilize in keeping things orderly in this audio only environment? I have been a party to arguments which, as you've mentioned, people talk over each other. It just becomes chaotic. But in an audio only, it's even more demanding because, of course, the parties aren't receiving visual cues. So how did the judge handle it?
Well, I think that's a really important observation and a good point. It was difficult, quite frankly, for the judge to handle it, and I think it would have been difficult for anybody in his position to handle it. Because as you say, there's only so much you can do, short of just talking over everybody else to get everybody to stop talking over each other. So that's just another reason why I come to really appreciate in-person appearances. You know, their inconveniences aside, there are many advantages.
Missing? Yes, missing in the but was there anything else missing in the virtual experience that is irreplaceable? I know exactly what you're speaking of regarding the person-to-person dynamic, but was there anything else, for example, involving documents or exhibits or anything else that might have been in play? Anything else that was hard to handle?
We were fortunate enough that in the course of these oral arguments, none of the parties had voluminous exhibits or other materials to show the court. And so they generally were pretty seamless in that regard. But I will say that in this particular litigation, our client is very concerned, as I'm sure most litigants are, about the progression and the outcome of the case. And previously, when we've had in-person appearances, our client would come and observe in the courtroom. So obviously that's something that is either difficult or occasionally impossible if it's just a virtual court appearance. You know, logistically, let's say the client, so to speak, consists of an entity or something where many stakeholders have an interest in observing the court proceedings. It's just not something that's really feasible if you're having a telephone conference between attorneys. It just enhances all of the logistical problems we were discussing. So I think that is one other, unfortunate aspect of purely virtual arguments and appearances.
In this 3 to 4 month period that we've had to endure, have you had to go to a courthouse in person for any reason, for any purpose? And if you have, what were the shortcomings of that in-person visit, if you've had any? I don't even recall that we even talked about that.
I've almost had to, but I didn't in the end. So it's an interesting question. In a different matter, in one of the upstate counties, we were anticipating filing or commencing an action, a special proceeding technically, and in connection with the commencement of that proceeding, filing an application for a temporary restraining order and preliminary injunctive relief by order to show cause. And this particular county is not signed up for the New York State Court electronic filing system.
Oh.
So even in the time of COVID, there was no real effective way to electronically commence and litigate the case, at least at the outset. So of course, the court clerks were extremely helpful and accommodating. I had a number of telephone calls with them to try to work this out from a logistical standpoint. And the way it would have worked is we would have had to make an appointment in advance to actually physically bring our papers to the courthouse and present the application to the court. And this obviously would have taken substantially more time than under normal circumstances, where you simply walk in and give your papers to the clerk and then bring them up to the judge and you proceed. So as I had mentioned earlier, that kind of a delay can really prejudice your client if there's a real pressing need for emergency relief. So that experience, ultimately we ended up not proceeding, but that experience, really demonstrated to me the not importance, but necessity of ensuring that statewide there is a uniform and effective way to electronically file court papers. It's obviously we've not quite reached that point yet.
Yes, and that, of course, brings us to our clients, and that is the individuals or the entities that we represent. In this period of time, it's been difficult to meet personally with our clients. How have you experienced any particular problems with the inability to have face-to-face conferences with clients and to have the kind of discussion with our clients that are necessary for fully effective representation? What have you experienced?
I think that those limitations, at least in my case, are most acute, or would have been most acute, in new matters or in getting new clients or in advising new clients. Because where you have an ongoing litigation that's in its late stages, you generally know where the case is going and what the positions are of the respective parties and how you want to litigate it. But in terms of developing new business or new client relationships, obviously this has been a difficult time. I don't think that I've actually commenced a new lawsuit during this period. That's not to say that I haven't had new matters come to my desk or that
well, have you had experience with new originations indirectly, and that is new matters that have just arisen? How are they processed? How are they brought into the office in order to have the foundation that we normally like to have before commencing or defending a litigation?
It's possible, and it has happened, but it's just different, and I don't think it's ideal for a lot of the reasons that you've touched upon. You know, again, I don't think there's a substitute for sitting down face to face with somebody and having a conversation about their situation, their interests, you know, their goals, and forming a relationship with that person. That's not to say that, you know, I haven't been busy. I've been fortunate enough to be quite busy throughout this period. But I don't think this is something that, you know, should last forever. I don't think we can be virtual lawyers for the rest of our careers.
Hopefully
it's just
not.
Yeah.
Hopefully not, yes. But I'm just wondering about the security of communications with new clients or established clients. What have you come to rely upon as far as secure communications, or what do you have confidence in?
I have confidence in our firm's, you know, Microsoft Outlook email system, quite frankly. We have a really great team of technology experts who keep us safe and secure from a technological standpoint. So nothing has changed in that regard. Communicating with clients through email. I don't communicate with clients concerning matters via text message or anything like that. I never felt comfortable doing that. I don't think that's advisable. So certainly I haven't been doing that. So for existing clients, or even in the case of new clients, you know, communicating by email is fine. I have not had the opportunity to, you know, Zoom with a, a new or prospective client. So I can't really speak to that if that's something that you were curious about. But I know that Zoom, I think I'm speaking about Zoom. I wouldn't want to disparage it, but I think it's Zoom. One of these apps has had real issues with security. So it's obviously a real and legitimate concern. And short of a video conference through, you know, an application on your smartphone, you can't interact with somebody face to face at this time. So yes, it's a real difficulty.
Well, of course, we're all dealing with new technology, enhanced technology, but is there anything that you would like to see permanently institutionalized regarding the court's use of technology in order to expedite proceedings and in order to make the court system more efficient? What have we learned in this ordeal, and what should we preserve in order to take away lessons from this experience?
Okay, so having just extolled the virtues of in-person oral argument, I still think that a uniform, reliable electronic filing system has to be implemented as soon as possible statewide, because it's fundamental that you know, litigants and their counsel can file court papers in an easy and efficient way. I just can't imagine if I had to make an appointment to show up to present an emergency application. You know, it's just not something that's feasible. And I think we can take that lesson going forward as the courts reopen. There are certain things where technology is absolutely indispensable, and e-filing is certainly one of them. Another thing I think is virtual argument in certain circumstances is very efficient and can be very effective. And courts have to be flexible, and the parties have to be flexible to assess whether in a particular set of circumstances it might make more sense for an argument to be held virtually, whether it be through video conferencing technology or by telephone conference or whatever, because it could save the parties time, it could save the parties money, and it could achieve a swifter resolution of the dispute.
So that might be worthy then of being institutionalized and avoiding the scenes that we're all familiar with, particularly in the New York City courts, of courtrooms bursting at the seams, lawyers all over each other, the parties present, and certainly there is a need to streamline and to make things more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. In the case of a compliance conference or a status conference, a preliminary conference, those sorts of appearances can absolutely be conducted virtually, I think.
Yes. All right. Well, you've made mention of several important issues here, but what words of advice might you give to other practitioners who are enduring what you've endured and must endure further for the foreseeable future while this plays itself out? What word of advice do you have for the bar?
Certainly, you have to be as technologically agile and astute as possible. There's no excuse not to be anymore. But I've been thinking a lot in particular, not necessarily about my lawyer colleagues, but about law school graduates. I mean, I can't imagine being a law school graduate during this time. You know, I graduated from college in 2009. So as an undergraduate, I definitely felt the effects of the financial crisis, the 2007, 2008 financial crisis. But in many ways, I think that the COVID pandemic puts new law school graduates in an even worse position, especially if they want to become litigators or trial lawyers at a time when in-person court appearances have all but stopped and everybody's tightening their belts, so to speak. So my advice to these law school graduates who want to become litigators is to try to find a position where they can research, where they can write, and where you can learn about the substance of the law, even if the position isn't as high paying as you might have liked, or even if it's in an area of the law that you never expected you'd practice in. If there's some position out there that affords you the opportunity to do real and substantive legal work and to in some way hone your research and writing abilities, because lawyers are still spending countless hours researching and writing. There's no question about that. Take that position and be flexible and be open-minded and try to find something where you can continue to try to do some real substantive work, even if it's not that big firm job or that high-paying, commercial position that you have coveted for the past 3 years.
Well, Matt, there are still those among us who studied law in the late 1960s, the 1970s, and into the early 1980s. What advice, if any, can you give regarding those who are uncomfortable with technology or simply not tech savvy? What advice might you give regarding how they can acquire the necessary skills?
Force your younger colleagues to help you out by any means necessary.
All right. Yes, just swallow your pride and ask the younger lawyers. All right, that's a very good word of advice.
Well, no, but in all seriousness, Judge, there is a really big generational gap between the level of comfort one feels with technology. I mean, people in my generation basically grew up with the sort of technology that older lawyers might not feel as comfortable with. There's a kind of ingrained intuitiveness that we have. So I definitely think that more seasoned attorneys who don't feel as comfortable with the latest technologies should feel any hesitation in reaching out to their younger colleagues.
Well, thank you very much. And with that, I believe that we've covered the areas that I had in mind for this program. And Matt, I want to thank you particularly for your participation. You obviously are a very bright young lawyer, and you've had experiences now that I think will hold you in very good stead for the remainder of this epidemic that we're suffering from and going forward. So once again, thank you. And let me also thank everyone in the audience for tuning into this interview that is a part of the Historical Society of the New York Courts recording of the bar's response to the pandemic project. You can find more information about this project and the society by going to our website at history.nycourts.gov. Once again, that's history.nycourts.gov. All right, with that, I want to thank you very much, and I wish you all the best of health and the best of success in overcoming the obstacles that have been put before us. Thank you.